Before you start typing in the comments section, yes, you read the title correctly. This is a review of the Meteor 75 Pro by Beta FPV, a drone that has been out for at least 1 year now. Yes, this drone is 1 year old. I'm very late to the review party. And if you're updated with Beta FPV, you would know that they just recently released the Air75 and the Air65. And I know what you're thinking. Rice Ball, the Air75 is smaller, lighter, more agile, and it has newer components. Why aren't you reviewing those instead? Those are the newer ones. This is 1 year old. Well, you smart nugget. The thing is, I knew that the Air75 and Air65 was going to perform well. It's gonna catch a lot of people's attention. We even have great reviewers. Come on, we got Albert Kim, we got Nick Burns, we even have Chris Rosser now. How am I gonna compete against that? My big sleep-deprived brain was like, okay, I know everyone's going to be reviewing the Air75 and the Air65. What can I do to stand out? I sat down, brainstormed for like a good 5 seconds, and I was like, let's go the opposite route. Let's go with the heavier, bigger, and chunkier setup. Let's get the Meteor 75 Pro. And I'm very impressed with its performance. So with that out of the way, let's get started and let's talk about the Meteor 75 Pro. All jokes aside, there is a really good reason why I wanted to try out the Meteor 75 Pro. Yes, the Air 75 is really cool and I'm actually really excited for it, but the thing is, I had this one itch in my brain that I wanted answers for. For the past few months now, I've been flying whoops indoors in my room specifically, and these are 65 with 31mm props, 35mm props, and even my Hachidori V2, which is a 75 with 40mm props. And I just wanted to see how big is too big for indoors. And naturally, a step further from 40mm props is 45mm props. And that is why I wanted to try the Meteor 75 Pro. It's probably not gonna perform as well as those lighter setups. But the thing is, I was pleasantly surprised, and that is why I wanted to make this video, because despite it being 1 year old already, I still think it is a compelling drone, a compelling bind and flight to get. Unboxing the Meteor 75 Pro, we first see a bunch of goodies that come with the bind and fly. We get a simple USB-C charger which has two BT 2.0 ports for the 1S batteries that come with the kit. And one thing I am pleasantly surprised with is that the USB-C cable is actually a data cable, so it can transfer files. And I mean, it's not insanely impressive, it's not groundbreaking, but that's one more spare cord that you can use outside of just drones. Future Rice Bowl speaking here, I just realized that the charger is also a voltmeter, which is actually really cool. If you need to check your batteries outside of just plugging it into your drone, I highly recommend using it. We get a set of spare props, some motor screws, and a small screwdriver, which are all good spares to have for a bind and fly. We get some accessories for the canopy, which also includes the 20-degree camera angle mount. Lastly, before we get to the big boy, we do get two 550 mAh 1S batteries with fixed BT 2.0 connectors on one end. I will say that it is up to the person buying this whether or not these goodies are adequate, helpful, or just seen as added costs. Personally, I think beginners will be happy, especially with the spare charger, since they can use that temporarily while saving or waiting for a better charger like the Vifly Whoopster V3. To some of the more advanced pilots, I agree that I would have traded the charger for more propellers. Now, let's get to the big boy, the Meteor 75 Pro. This has a wheelbase of around 82mm motor to motor, and the frame is surprisingly beefy compared to the other Meteor frames. I believe it uses the same material as the other Meteor frames, but this is considerably more stiff and thick with 3 to 4 Cs. The frame is very beefy. They're also using their standard 3-point light canopy, which works with the CO3 camera and the MO3 VTX. The canopy also has swappable brackets for changing camera angles, which I honestly prefer over canopies that swivel. It uses Beta FPV's 1102 22,000 kV motors paired with these Gemfan 45mm tri-blade props. Also, note that the motors have motor connectors on them, which I know some people look for and some people don't like. The CO3 camera is honestly one of the best looking cameras out there for whoops. On the other hand, I know some pilots don't like the MO3 VTX, but for indoor and proximity use, I honestly think it's adequate enough as long as you make sure there's enough airflow going into it. Inside, we have the Beta FPV F4 1S all-in-one, which has 5-amp ESCs with BlueJay, and your serial ELRS receiver, which uses a simple wire antenna hidden inside the canopy. Beta FPV also has options on their website if you want to opt for FrSky, TVS, or you can buy it as a plug-and-play. I believe it uses the BMI 270 gyro and it has one spare UR to attach your VTX to. It's also pretty cool that there is onboard black box with 8 MB of space, and I've used this board a few times now in my other builds, and so far they've been holding up really well, so I don't have too much concern for these all-in-ones. Right out of the bat, I will say that the packaging is really nice, but more importantly, it's very sturdy, which will protect your package during transit. I also like the included spares and goodies that come with the bind and fly. I think spare props are standard practice for bind and flies. 2 spare sets would have been better, but 1 set is completely acceptable. I like the included cable and the charger mostly because I think it's a good portable charger you can use and just put in a bag. I think the drone itself is going to handle a lot of abuse, mainly because of how beefy the frame and canopy are. The components they're using are also pretty standard for Beta FPV, which, thinking about feature like repairing or using the parts for different builds, you can easily source out spares like motors and all-in-ones, which is a huge bonus for me. Starting off with some expectations, I will say that the Meteor 75 Pro is considerably larger than the drones that I usually fly, and I would think that my Hachidori V2 is already reaching that kind of hard to go through small gaps territory. I expect that this will be hard to fly indoors, but will perform the best outdoors or in a reasonably large indoor area. I also want to add that this is heavier than your usual whoop. 65 and 75 whoops usually range around 16 to 27 grams dry weight for an analog build, and the Meteor 75 Pro is reaching 31 grams. Aside from the difference in flight performance compared to your lighter setups, you will want to be more careful when flying indoors because this is reaching might break something territory. Before I continue, I do want to say that Beta FPV did reach out to me to review the Meteor 75 Pro. They gave me this and some frames to try out, but rest assured, all my comments and evaluations are purely my own and I'll be as objective and unbiased in my review. With that out of the way, let's look at some test flights. I started with the outdoor flights since I knew that this thing was larger and heavier. I wanted to think of the Meteor 75 Pro as an outdoor whoop first, and at the back of my mind, I was comparing it to some open prop drones that I've flown before. The outside performance of the Meteor 75 Pro is pretty good considering that it has smaller propellers and ducts compared to something like a toothpick. In the weather conditions that I've flown so far, which is mostly minimal wind and cloudy forecasts, it flew fantastic, but there was a considerable amount of prop wash in some tricks. Doing my usual tricks, I think it handles pretty well. In terms of freestyle, it does have some weight so you can toss it around and I think some people will like that. But take note that this is a bottom-mounted battery, which does affect its flight characteristics, but I think most people in the micro arena are already used to that. Lastly, I realized that I was mostly flying through small gaps and branches, and this was parts of the flight that I enjoyed the most. The Meteor 75 Pro was really controllable, and even when it started to rain, I found myself just flying underneath cars effortlessly. And if you don't know, ground effect is a bitch. Oops, I can't say that, I'm a family-friendly show. Anyways, with all that information in mind, I wanted to try out the Meteor 75 Pro in a somewhat indoor open space area like my first floor. Flying indoors, I was pleasantly surprised that it performed exceptionally well. I quickly started trying to fly harder and faster, similar to how I flew my 65s and 75s indoor. I'm honestly really impressed with how well I could weave through things and gaps. Granted, it's not perfect and I did bump into objects the first few times, but it still flew exceptionally well and you will get used to the size fairly quickly. The video signal from the M03 camera at 100 milliwatts of output power was fine around the house and is acceptable in my book. And I'm not entirely sure if this is seen in the DVR, but my first floor has some really weird lighting conditions, like some parts are really bright and some parts are really dim. So the fact that this camera is handling that pretty well is a plus for me. Going back to what I mentioned in the outdoor flights, throttle control felt really nice on the Meteor 75 Pro, and I found myself going through short gaps like under my living room table and underneath the bar table's gaps. One thing I realized flying indoors is that the Meteor 75 Pro is insanely smooth. I have the exact same setup and rates here on my other drones, but I find myself flowing and doing smooth maneuvers around my first floor. This gives me the impression that I could probably get some HD footage with this if I mounted something like a Runcam Thumb. And this is actually what my friend Spezilover did with his Meteor 75 Pro. He had pretty good results and he even made his own custom cinemod for the 75 Pro. So if you're interested in that, there's going to be a link to his channel down in the description. Doing tricks around the first floor, I could get some flips, rolls, and some complex tricks. Granted, I have been flying indoors for about a year now, but I would like to think that this is still manageable for novice to advanced pilots. Surprisingly, I didn't really have that much of a hard time in tight spots like weaving through my living room sofas and doing tight turns. Given everything that I've mentioned so far, I was ready and I was interested of how far I could push the Meteor 75 Pro, so it was time to fly this in my room. Flying in my room felt like the last place I would fly something that close to a 2-inch drone. I think it's clear how much bigger this is compared to our 75 and 65 drones, but despite this, I wanted to be surprised, and surprised I was. At this point, I knew that the Meteor 75 Pro was fairly good at going through gaps and handling good amount of abuse, so I flew it just as I would my usual whoops. I managed to do a couple of orbits underneath my bed, which is honestly a good throttle control test, and the Meteor 75 Pro passed. I can easily go through the U-turn underneath my table's corner, which takes a good amount of yaw control. This was one of the worries I had with a heavier and larger setup, but I can gladly say that it wasn't hard maneuvering with the Meteor 75 Pro. Heck, I was so comfortable that I started flying through my chair. Flying through my chair in this little corner is actually, at least to me, an indication that this drone is extremely controllable. Going to the next part, we have the PVC tower. I made this mostly for doing turns, but lately I've been doing more freestyle with it, namely power loops, matties, split S's, and if possible dives. I think this is where I found the limitation of the Meteor 75 Pro, or at least I say limit, really it's just something that you have to adjust to. Naturally, something bigger will have more punch and more power, and that's evident when I'm doing split S's and power loops because oftentimes I hit the ceiling. Again, something you can learn over time. Lastly, there is one part of my room that I struggled to fly the Meteor 75 Pro through, which is this corner close to my closet, which has these two levels that I usually go through or orbit around. The hardest part about this is that it has a tight sharp turn going in. The space for that sharp turn is so small that you'd have to slow down a considerable amount to not crash. I managed to fly through this gap several times, but I will say that it took a good amount of effort and some time adjusting to get good muscle memory of how to go through that gap smoothly. Nonetheless, the fact that I can still hit small gaps and fly in a small room is already insanely impressive and above my expectations, and it just goes to show how much control the Meteor 75 Pro has, despite its size, despite its weight. Just going over some small things I liked and don't like, let's start with durability. I've been flying this for the last few weeks now, several packs every day, and I did have several crashes that would have made me concerned if this was any other Whoop, but the added weight and the chunkiness of this guy really helped make it more durable. I think any loss in performance from the added weight is balanced by the added durability, which I think many will appreciate, especially beginners. Looking at some reviews online, people were mentioning breaking the VTX quite easily, which has not happened to me personally, both in my Meteor 75 Pro and the other drones that I have the MO3 on. Another thing that I'd like to mention that I'm glad for is that Beta FPV changed their battery connector to a right angle connector. This removes the need for a long cable when using batteries with fixed connectors. However, I do wish that they used slightly thicker battery leads. According to another amazing YouTuber that tests micro drone related things, Butterfly FPV, he did mention in his video on the Meteor 75 Pro that changing to a thicker battery lead improved performance a considerable amount. He also went over some mods, namely for weight reductions, which I may try out in the near future. Link to his video in the description. Another thing about the battery leads is that mine did get chewed up from the propellers. I found that in forward crashes when the battery would shift forward, the battery lead would bundle up either to the left or right side into the spinning propellers, which honestly could be fixed if you just zip-tied the battery cable to the frame like this. Speaking of being chewed up, something I only realized at the end of my testing is that the VTX antenna also got damaged from the propellers. This was a concern of one person in one of the reviews I've read, and same with the battery leads, you can just add a zip tie here to decrease the likelihood of the antenna reaching the propellers. Lastly, I do want to mention flight time since Beta FPV did advertise 6 minutes and 40-second flight times. I never really got to 6 minutes with the 550 mAh 1S batteries that they included, but with the flights that I had, which had a mix of cruising and freestyle, I almost always reach 5 minutes, which to me is beyond acceptable. Actually, I would like to test flying this on smaller batteries to sacrifice some flight time for less weight, but we'll see in the future. Overall, I am very impressed with the Beta FPV Meteor 75 Pro. Despite being 1 year old now, this is still a great bind and flight to get in 2024. Despite the initial concerns I had about the size and weight, it do be and can be an indoor drone. I still want to say that I am an inexperienced pilot, but even then, the Meteor 75 Pro has an amazing level of control and precision to it. The parts in this work well with each other, and I like the long flight times that I get on this, regardless if I'm just cruising or flying hard. I also want to point out that this is a good drone to branch out into bigger drones. If you're a beginner who's starting with whoops but want to start getting to larger drones, I honestly think the Meteor 75 Pro is a good candidate for that. It flies well outdoors, and personally, it shined a lot more than I expected indoors. Whoops are generally looked at as micro drones that have ducks and that's it, but to me, it's the ability to fly through gaps and to have fun in locations bigger drones can't be flown in. In that sense, I can safely say that the Meteor 75 Pro is a great whoop. Thank you for watching this review on the Meteor 75 Pro. I know this is very random. The Air75 just came out. I'm really excited to review that if I get to try to, but we'll see in the future. Again, thank you also to Beta FPV for letting me try this out. If you guys want to get one for yourself, or the Air75 or the Air65, there is a link to their website down in the description, and I'm happy to say that this is an affiliate link. So that means that I do get a small percentage with no added cost to you whatsoever every time this link is used, and it supports me and this channel, so if you want to use it, feel free to use it. As always, I want to take the chance to say that I'm extremely grateful to have you guys. It's nice getting to make these kinds of videos and sharing things that I like, whether it's like reviewing things like this or sharing my designs. I do have a lot more things planned in the next few months, things related to drones, and some that are personal projects that I think you guys may also find interesting. So I hope I get to share those with you guys. And again, thank you so much for supporting me and my channel, and I hope I get to see you guys in the next video. With that out of the way, I am going to sleep. Whoever made this script sucks. They don't even have proper grammar. Oh my god.